Last week, the Department of Education published a proposed new rule establishing priorities for grants in American history and civics education programs. All right, your antennae should go up. Alert, alert. When the left starts talking about history and civics, you should pay attention. Well, and what has been given priority in this rule are projects that incorporate racially, ethnically, culturally, and linguistically diverse perspectives, end quote. Now, the rule goes on to cite and praise the New York Times landmark 1619 project. What could this mean for public schools in America? Well, joining me now to talk about this, Stanley Kurtz, Senior Fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. Stanley, welcome back to the program.
Tony, thanks so much for having me on.
So now we know why they had to deep six the 1776 commission. They had to make room for critical race theory.
Absolutely, Tony. This is deeply disturbing, although not at all surprising. And here's the really scary part. If it were just this rule, it wouldn't be that bad. But there is legislation pending in Congress right now called the Civics Secures Democracy Act. It would appropriate $1 billion a year to fund history and civic education. And if you combine the priority criteria already in that legislation with the new Biden rule, then this would be like a second Common Core, but much worse. You might remember that Obama was able to force Common Core on 48 of the 50 states just by offering grant money through what was called Race to the Top. Well, if the Civic Secures Democracy Act passes, it will be exceedingly difficult to prevent even red states from applying for these grants that will have a requirement that to win the grant, the state has to impose critical race theory and something else called action civics, essentially political protest, and in practice, leftist political protest for course credit. That will be imposed even on the red states in most instances if that legislation passes and the Biden administration administers the grants.
And Stanley, you also point out in a piece that you wrote, that's, by the way, folks, it's at my website, tonyperkins.com, Biden set to push critical race theory on U.S. schools, that these red states, even, you got conservative states, but when this grant money is out there and the education establishment, which is always tracking to the left, starts pounding those governors and legislators saying, oh, you're not giving us the money. You won't allow us to have this kind of money. We need this money for education. Most of them will fold like a cheap suit.
That is right, Tony. There is a way to stop this. First, of course, we could block the federal bill. In addition to that, what states need to pass their own bills. And if your folks go and look up my name, Stanley Kurtz, and something called the Partisanship Out of Civics Act, I have posted model legislation endorsed by the National Association of Scholars at the National Association of Scholars website that would bar both action civics and critical race theory and the worst ideas from the 1619 project from states. And so this would block the bureaucrats from being able to fulfill the priority criteria of the federal grants. So we really have to fight this at both the federal and the state level, and frankly, the district level as well.
Yeah, I think that's extremely important because right now what you see happening in Washington, D.C. is not encouraging because they're ramming these things through. We just had Senator Langford on talking about their entire agenda and how it all hinges on two Democrats keeping the filibuster in place. So you're absolutely right. State legislatures need to be involved in this. And quite frankly, folks, that's where you can have the greatest impact is at the state level with your state legislators. And Stanley, if I'm not mistaken, there are some states already pushing through legislation. I don't know if it's your model legislation, but legislation similar to that would prohibit critical race theory from being taught.
Yes, Tony. A bill inspired by my model is advancing in Texas, but several other states are advancing bills to block critical race theory. But frankly, there are problems with some of those bills. Some of them are good, and some of them are more problematic. It's tough to, a lot of them adapted President Trump's executive order barring critical race theory, but you have to make certain tweaks when you bring that into the area of teacher training and K-12 curriculum. And if you try to control the college classroom, the law will probably be struck down. So it sort of catch can on a lot of these bills. A lot of them are failing. Some of them are going to pass and be overturned. Some of them are written the right way. I do think that my model is both the safest and the most comprehensive, because it's the only one that bars both critical race theory and action civics. And people don't realize it. Action civics has only been mandated so far in Illinois and Massachusetts, but it's very much written into these federal bills. And if a state even if a state succeeds in barring critical race theory, it could have this mandatory political protest that would also mandate teachers discuss current political controversies in class. We know what the teachers' politics are for the most part. So you really have to bar both action civics and critical race theory. And my model and the Texas bill are the only ones so far doing that.
Well, we'll certainly encourage lawmakers to take a look at that and for folks to pass that along. It's encouraging that they're actually concerned about this and taking steps to address it. Let's help them do it the right way. But the last thing we need are our children being turned into little leftist activists, which is exactly what's happening in Illinois. You were on here before talking about that. We want to nip that in the bud, as Barney Fife would say. Stanley Kurtz, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Tony.